I call myself a Fnaf fan, but I'm not entirely sure that it's that simple. See, while the rest of the mascot horror genre has become a parody of itself, I still find myself being drawn back to the Fnaf community for some reason. The weird thing is, I've never been a huge fan of the games. Don't get me wrong, they're good, most of them anyway, but I've never really liked horror games. I just can't handle the dread. For me, Fnaf was always special because of its story, but there's something about it that I haven't really seen anyone else talk about, and it's the fact that the games don't really tell a story at all. I'll explain, just bear with me. It's relatively common knowledge that when Fnaf 1 released, there was no intention of it being a 1 of anything. Scott was intending for this to be his last game, which means that there was not much of a coherent story there. There were some tidbits of something, the missing children's incident, the bite of 87, Golden Freddy. Now I can't read Scott's mind, but I certainly don't think that these pieces of info were meant to coalesce into a coherent book of lore, and I certainly don't think that he had planned everything from Fazgu to Liberty Chica. These pieces of lore were meant to be ambience, atmosphere, horror meant to imply something larger without having it all planned out. This Fnaf 1 achieves perfectly. However, the purpose of these details would soon change. Fnaf became an overnight success. Only 4 days after its official release, Markiplier had posted his Let's Play of it. Now a second game was in the works and the fandom had exploded in size. The new fandom found these lore details fascinating and started speculating about them. This culminated in MatPat making his first Fnaf theory, kicking interest in Fnaf, and more importantly its lore, into the stratosphere. This to me is the pivotal moment, the moment when this franchise made a turn that would lead to me still liking it to this day. And so, seeing all the interest in the lore, Scott decided to keep going with the same approach. More details, more tidbits, more phone calls with implications, and a new addition of vague Atari-style minigames that were like a giant glowing light bulb to the burgeoning Fnaf theory community. As a result, this is the time when the Fnaf theory space really got into its rhythm, with MatPat releasing his theory on Fnaf 2 that would set the tone for the future of basically all Fnaf theories that have come since. Really, it's almost prophetic. The theory spends some time putting together a timeline that's described by explicit in-game exposition, and after he has set these ground rules, the rest of the video is him taking the few fixed points given by the games and constructing a story around them. This was the first murder, he says, and the child would go on to be the puppet, and this was when he gained his serial killer signature. It's narrativizing, and of course it ended in the all too familiar, what if these two characters were the same person this entire time? Things really haven't changed, huh? You might have missed it, but something very unusual happened here, so let's compare this to MatPat's theory about another similar game franchise. Bendy and the Ink Machine released only a couple years after the first Fnaf games, and the influences were clear. The mascot horror, the vague possession stuff, the jump scares, it occupied a lot of the same areas in the public consciousness. But there is a key difference between Bendy and Fnaf. It's why MatPat didn't make nearly as many videos on Bendy as he did on our favorite haunted animatronics. Well, partly it's because there's less material, but another part is that the game's story has already been clearly told. You'll notice, if you watch MatPat's first Bendy theory, he will summarize the story in a couple minutes, and then he'll say,
And honestly, that's about it for now. Now, many of you have been asking me on Twitter, at MatPatGT, as well as during GT Live, to do a theory about this game, to try and predict what's going on.
He says it himself. The only theory he is capable of making is prediction. There's no justification given for it, it's just assumed. You aren't told of a story hidden within that the game wouldn't explain because there's nothing in the game to explain. The game tells its story clearly, without obfuscation. The only worthwhile theory here is predicting what might happen in the future of the game by analyzing the story, predicting where character arcs may fall, all that good stuff. Notably, this video is essentially useless now. If you want to find out what happens in the next chapter, you can simply play it. The Fnaf 2 theory, however, is telling a story of its own, and while it is based on the ever-changing Fnaf lore that would undergo many changes, it still remains compelling to this day. To spell it out clearly, the story of the Fnaf games from the start has never been told directly by the games. The story has always been based on the games and all the auxiliary media, but told by its fans. Once I realized this, it really clicked into place for me, why I've always been so strangely fascinated by Fnaf. These theories have always been in conversation with the community, passing ideas back and forth with the goal of constructing the most satisfying narrative. In a way, we were all part of the story, reacting and coming up with our own explanations for teasers and design details.
I think it's always fascinating, the conversation between like the original artists and creators of the game or the IP and the people who are reacting to it in real time through their fan art, through their video creations, through their fan games, through our theories, and you have this dialogue back and forth talking.
This is not a normal way for a game developer to tell a story. this is something else. I do think it's really strange how normalized it is that if someone asks you what FNAF is about, you're not going to tell them to play the games, gods no. You'll tell them to engage with the community. If you want to find out what FNAF is about, you watch the theories. To me, it almost feels like folklore, the way that the understanding of the FNAF lore perpetuates itself through retellings and art based on the games, that in turn reinterpret the other stories told by the community. This is why it's so interesting to me to see our collective understanding of the lore evolve in real time. This isn't to say that the games don't do any storytelling, they obviously do, but the games are deliberately made in a way to let this kind of community storytelling flourish, leaving things vague enough for us to fill in the gaps. A cool consequence of this is that the games themselves can later take advantage of all this material that the FNAF fandom has built up to tell a more impactful story. I think the best example would be FNAF 6. Henry's ending monologue hits so hard because we saw the story of these almost archetypical characters we built up finally be resolved in some sense. And they really are archetypes. The evil man that lashed out and the old partner that ended up being betrayed by him and set the rest of his life for vengeance. They're simple characters with easy to understand motivations because that's all the community can agree on. So in this game, Scott took advantage of these simple archetypes in a way, resolving the dialectic of these opposing characters. Henry finally did it. He took his revenge, finally letting the one he lost rest. This is never explicitly explained in the games. Making this kind of story beat work wouldn't really be possible without fans building up this story of Henry and Afton in theories and discussions and pieces of fan art. People make fun of how complicated FNAF lore is, and it's true it's complicated, but it's not because Scott failed to make it simpler. Well, maybe a little bit, but mostly it's complicated because we were the ones to tell the story. When so many people that aren't all that organized try to construct a story around a mostly blank slate, it's no surprise that the result ends up being a little confusing. I find something strangely captivating about that. Having been there from relatively early on, for me the most surprising twists and turns of the story aren't anything that happened in the games, but the revelations that happen outside of them. Just recently, we found out the crying child's name, but it isn't impactful because of the way we found it through the security logbook. It's impactful because of how long we have been trying to find it out. In some sense, we were the build-up. I think it's beautiful, all of us being a part of this communal fanfiction. I think it's the main reason why most of us have stuck around so long. But yeah, that's just what I think. I've been trying to figure out why I like FNAF for a while now, and this video is the result. I hope you enjoyed, and I guess you should subscribe.